Okay, so we're very lucky to have Dr. Joe Luck with us tonight. He's an associate professor of biological systems engineering or precision ag engineer, and he is going to really give us tons of tips, tricks, and info about using digital ag and ag technology. So take it away, Joe.
All right, Megan, thanks. And yeah, just let me know if something pops up, you're not able to see or hear me, if the slides don't advance or something. But yeah, excited to share with you a little bit about some of the work we've done here over the last couple of years with kind of merging ag technology with on-farm research to try and get, some better information for folks, and learned a lot of lessons from that. And so hopefully we'll be able to share a little bit of that with you all this evening, and for folks that listen in down the road. So just a quick overview of what we'll talk about. I just thought it might be nice to walk through this kind of like we're going through the year doing a on-farm research study. So we'll talk a little bit about how to plan. One of the things we do a lot of work with is the prescription map development, and then actually going out to the field to deploy the study. One of the things I think is really important is in-season observations. We'll talk a little bit about some tools for that. And then, probably the most important piece of this is the yield data collection at the end of the year, and then the final analysis that you put together for the study. So we've done, probably a dozen to 24 studies here over the past several years, and trying to get people more used to using, the variable rate systems to actually do their own studies on their farm. So some of the questions that always come up, you have to really think about, are you using a planner to do the study, or are you using some type of maybe a nitrogen applicator, liquid, whatever. The first thing you have to think about is, how are you going to set that study up? What's my harvester or my combine header going to look like at the end of the year? And, it seems kind of trivial, but it can get to be pretty challenging. I mean, most people, with the planter on corn, odds are people have a header that's half the width of the planter. When you're talking soybeans, I've met one farmer that has the same planter width as their header width. So everybody else it's either a 30 or 40 foot planter and a 35-foot header or something like that. So it gets to be a little bit more challenging. The other thing that you really have to think about is, am I going to be able to hit the rates that I want to? We've seen some seeding rate studies where, just because of the technology, the planter, the speed the operator was driving at couldn't hit the rates that we really wanted to. We see that a lot in liquid application systems. So sometimes you have to think about that when you're putting in the plots. You may have to speed up a little bit or slow down just to keep things going like you need them to be. The other important piece is, what rates do we want to test? So if I'm a grower and I want to test out, a range of application rates, typically I'm going to pick my rate, and that's going to be the midpoint, and then at least go up and down a step on either side. And usually we try to encourage people to go down 2 steps. So, if my nitrogen management plan was 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen, we might say, well, let's do 140, 170, 200, and 230 or something like that. And especially in nitrogen, it's really nice if you can throw some zero rate blocks in, because then you can really see what the potential is of that field in terms of, is there organic matter that can help maybe generate some plant available nitrogen during the year. So we recommend that in nitrogen in particular, at least 30 pounds an acre step among treatments, and that's just to get some spread across your rates. If we're doing soybean seeding rates, we would probably recommend about the same 30,000 seeds per acre. So over the past 2 or 3 years, we've done usually 80, 110, 140, and 170,000 on soybean seeding rates. And then on corn, planting rates, looking at somewhere around 3,000 to maybe 4,000 seeds per acre difference among our rates. So if my target, was 37,000 or so, I might do 34, 31, and then you could go 40 just to see what the higher rate's going to do. But in other words, you want to have a nice spread in your rates to be able to pick up that trend, and then actually really hope that the technology can generate those rates with you're in the field. The other thing that we always think about is we try and look at yield history or maybe soil survey data on the field. You know, if we're going to test different locations of the field, trying to isolate things like that. And so it helps you kind of determine where to put maybe those blocks. So this is an example here on the top right of one of the studies we've been able to generate this type of layout in the field. So you can see there's a lot of different blocks and a lot of different treatment plots out here. I'm going to probably use the term block or rep synonymously here. So if we look at this block that's kind of highlighted by the black box, you notice that we've got four different seeding rates in there, and then those blocks are replicated across the field, and we need to do that. So I would always recommend, if you're going to test something, I would test at least 4 or 5 reps or blocks. If we're going to run statistics on this, we have to have 3. So if you're like me and something happens and you lose a block or 2, you can always fall back and still run some type of analysis. The other thing is, and you'll see this in a couple of different ways, but notice the pattern is not the same in each of our blocks. These 2 actually are, which is kind of random, but if you notice, it kind of changes up everywhere else here in this field, and that's the randomization piece. We want to try and mix up the order that we do those in, and that's especially important, you know, if you're going to do a field link strips and just have rates kind of following each other across the field. You really want to randomize the order at which those happen. When we develop our small plots, like what you see in the upper right, we always shoot for about 300 feet of plot length. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is it ensures that your application equipment is going to probably be able to hit the rate that you want. So if you're stepping from a really high rate to a low rate, that might take a little time. The other piece of that is with the yield monitor data. And previous studies have kind of shown that if you can get somewhere above 250 or so feet of yield data points, you're going to correlate pretty well with a grain cart weight or some type of scale weight. And as you know, if you kind of look at this picture, this is an image that Klaus has. I think it does a really neat job of showing the different flow paths that a piece of cut crop might take through the combine. So you're going to have your primary threshing. Some of that could go up into past the rotors here, into the straw walkers and drop down. We've got, you know, material can get caught up here and go into the rethreshing system, and that gets dumped back in the rotors. But, you know, if you think about that, 3 different paths that the same, you know, neighborhood of crop could go through just to get to that yield monitor. So having a good length of yield data points helps us average that out. And if anybody's ever looked at yield data point to point, you'll know what I'm talking about. Soybeans, sometimes this might require, when we're designing the studies, I mentioned before, you know, if our planter is 30 feet and our header on our combine is 35 feet, typically what we would do is do 3 planter passes. And if you kind of map that out, what that shows you is I'm going to get at least 1 header pass through each one of those strips up through the field. If you're doing small plots like this in the upper right-hand corner, you won't eat up a lot of field space, and you can get a lot of good data. But and so that's one of the reasons why we do that. So these plots right here, I believe, are actually about 90 by 300. Another thing that's kind of helpful when you do that too is a lot of times people will harvest. You know, if their soybeans start to lodge a little bit, they'll actually harvest in a cross pattern at some angle, and we can still get decent yield data sometimes out of that if we have these plots a little bit oversized like that. So just something to think about. We've had pretty good success. I think, again, we've designed at least a dozen field trials here in just the last couple of years. And we use a combination of software. AgLeader SMS is one that we use to kind of finalize the plans. We use a different software called ArcMap when we're developing a lot of our plots. Another thing, SMS has come up with a neat field trial planning system, which it allows you to take the field boundary and maybe some other shapes, but then it lets you line those up if you have an A-B line. It'll even do curve paths, so it's a really neat tool. And so if you're interested in that, we've actually got, Laura Thompson put this together, but if you look at this digitalag.teachable.com, you can actually go in and learn how to set these plots up using SMS. And it's actually not that difficult. You can go in and set your plots up across the field and just upload that to your ag technology in the cab. So when we take that stuff to the field, the only best advice I can give you is, trust that it's going to work, but always verify. So we've had some systems where we created prescription maps that didn't work out so well. Here's an example. On the left, here's a treatment map that we created for a grower we were working with, irrigated corn nitrogen rate study. When he uploaded that to the monitor, I think this was a Green Star 3, that system regrids the treatment map. So what you see is all these little blocks out here. Each one of these, I think, is 9 meters by 9 meters. So you can see that we didn't quite get the same width in all of our blocks, and that's kind of an artifact. I do know that Deere has corrected this with Green Star 4. One of the things we would do to mitigate this in this case is probably design the blocks a little bit wider to try and make sure we're getting plenty of passes up through the field with our applicator and our header at the end of the year. The other point I would make is it's really useful to download the as-applied data as quick as you can and kind of look for some type of anomaly. You can see a white outline here of the treatment blocks we did for another field. You can see some of the blocks had some issues with rate change, didn't quite hit rate. This could have been another one of those Green Star 3 issues, although we thought we had the plots pretty wide. One of the nice things about this is it lets you know almost immediately, are there areas where I had challenges that I don't need to spend a lot of time, messing with in the future. And certainly, if you're looking at like this block where you've got basically the lowest rate, half the block's the highest rate, that's something you don't want to include in your study. And the as-applied data lets us take a look at that a little bit more closely. One of the things that we started last year is, and to some extent I think everybody does this, but really trying to dial in the in-season observation. So there's a lot of neat systems out there that you can do this. One of the ones that we ended up using last year was SMS Mobile, just because we work with the software some. But what you can do is basically you can start with your treatment map. So here's a soybean seeding rate study we did for a center pivot. If you have a tablet, I think we use a Windows Surface. You can see in this picture Nathan Mueller. This is the size of the GPS unit that we got from Trimble that we can tie into that. I think it's got 20 centimeter accuracy. The software will actually, when you upload your scouting blocks that you want to go to, the software will actually guide you from block to block, which is really helpful when you're out in the field. And then as you're inputting data, it stores that into an attribute table like this. So you can see later in the year, we've got our target rates here. We've actually got in-season plant population counts. If there's other data that we've been kind of collecting through the year, where there's stem bore issues, what was the stem diameter, all that data gets stored every time we go out to the field. And at the end of the year, we can merge that together and generate something like this, where we might have a georeference scouting map. It can tell us if we had emergence issues, for instance, in some areas. And I think this is something, as aerial imagery gets to be more and more easy to work with, I guess, this is going to be something that's going to be automated in the future, but I think it's just helping us prepare to have that information, better scrutinize our results, look for emergence issues and things like that, particularly in soybeans. As you think about the end of the year, the biggest, best piece of advice is, calibrate the yield monitor before you go to the field, or as close to the harvest as you can for your plots. That act affects every single point that you collect out in the field. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is when you're driving through the plots, especially if we're designing these 300-foot long plots, it's really important to be as consistent as you can with speed through those plots. So minimizing speed changes, trying to drive at a moderate speed, not the fastest you'd be harvesting, but also not the slowest. You want to keep the flow through the machine up as you're thinking about your calibration. Another thing that this can help do, one of the growers we work with actually would go fairly slow to try and minimize the rethreshing, of the corn when he was harvesting his nitrogen plots. And again, that the ability to do that kind of reduced one flow path of grain through that machine. So I think that could have helped his yield data some. We certainly saw the effect of rate changes much faster in his yield data than I've seen before. It's really critical, especially with harvest width. You don't want to do what you see down here on the lower right. You want to maintain, a consistent harvest width, especially in soybeans, and in particular if you're in 30-inch rows. Because if you think about it, if you're running a 30-foot header, it doesn't take a row or two, and you've missed a consistent and a large amount of material running through that header. So that's just a little thing that helps out a lot if you can do that. We always post-process our yield data. Inevitably, you're going to get a couple of data points here and there that are just outliers. It's probably machine related, something like that. There's a lot of different ways to make that happen. Yield Editor is a free software that you can get that USDA generated to help do that. And again, when we're using those smaller plots, it's really important to make sure that we get the best data out of those small areas as we can. Again, I would go back, if you're interested, that digitalag.teachable.com. There's another course we've put out there that actually walks you through the process of using that software if you're interested in that. In other words, just trying to get better data. As you move into the final analysis, the biggest thing that I've seen, and a lot of people still don't do this, is, especially on rate studies, a lot of people don't take into account the cost of that treatment. So I think a lot of people today are starting to move to profitability maps, which is great. So I think a lot of folks are thinking, I've got to look at dollars and cents. I can't just look at, this rate ended up yielding this much. The cost of the treatment might have significantly outweighed that. So you still see some product literature out there where they're not taking things out to cost and profit benefit. So that's just something you have to do. When it comes to statistical analysis, it's really helpful to work with a group of people, not me, people that actually do a really good job with statistical analysis. There's a lot of different ways to interpret the data. There's a lot of different settings you can make when you're running those analyses, and it can all play an important role in how you interpret the results. I would throw out there as well that the On-Farm Research Network, we're currently beta testing. We've had a few people I know use it with some pretty good success. It will be a tool online, and again, Laura's working on that with On-Farm Research to basically take your data results. You can enter those in and get the results of your statistical analysis. So hopefully it'll put that into people's hands much more quickly. And the last thing I guess I would leave you with is, I've gone over a lot of stuff. I didn't want to have a huge presentation here, but is it worth it? And I think it is. There's a lot of services out there that are directing how much money you put into your fields, whether that's fertility or that seeding rate, et cetera. The ability to do these kind of tests, run statistical analysis on it with several reps, I think it's showing some really high potential. The growers we've worked with in the last couple of years, they've seen they can reduce nitrogen by 30 pounds an acre, and they're not losing yield. The growers we've done, I think, eight studies on soybean just in the last couple of years. If they're at 110 to 140,000 seeds per acre, that's the highest they can get, in terms of yield and factoring in cost. And that's, a lot of the folks we're talking to, they're going to end up saving $20 an acre just by dropping seeding rates. We talked a little bit about reps or the blocks, and what I would leave you with here is, here's a study that you can see across the x-axis here, the block ID. The y-axis is the marginal net return. And so basically these are 4 different seeding rates. So low seeding rate to high seeding rate. Overall, you can see the trend here. The highest marginal net returns were at those lower 2 seeding rates. And what you'll notice is encircled in red, so 2 out of the 8 blocks, the second highest seeding rate would have shown the most. So it wasn't a consistent trend. What's even more interesting is 2 in the blue circles here, 2 out of the 8 blocks, there was actually a spike in the highest seeding rate, resulting in the highest marginal net return. So if this was just a simple, I'm going to compare my rate versus your rate, we could have gotten the wrong answer 2 times potentially, which is just not good. So the ability to run multiple reps lets us analyze that data a little bit more confidence and actually see some statistical indicators stick out here. So anyway, I think it is worth it. I think you get better answers out of the data when you can really run a good study and then make some comparisons like that. So that's all I had prepared. Please reach out if you have questions. I put my contact information. You can always reach out through the on-farm research as well. I appreciate you tuning in this evening. I hope you have a safe and healthy 2020 under the circumstances. Anybody out in the ag industry, we need you now more than ever. So with that, I think I'll stop there and Megan can direct me, but I think if we had some questions, I'll be glad to try and field those.
Okay, we do. So, do you have any tools to help with randomization when setting up a plot?
Say that one more time, Megan. I think it cut out on me.
Sorry about that. Do you have any tools to help randomization when setting a plot up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we could probably come up with something. Laura might nod her head. I think the on-farm research app that we had allowed for setting up randomized studies. So if you put in your treatments and entered those in, then it would generate a plot that was randomized. Is that right, Laura? Yeah. So there's one option there. It's the Nebraska on-farm research app. There's several different ways you can do that. I created a little thing in Excel. I put it in there, and every time I hit the button, it generates a new combination. But reach out to one of us if you're interested in getting your hands on something like that. We can definitely help you out. The old dice is another way to do it. You can roll the dice, literally. So.
Thank you, Joe. I also put the link to the app in the chat, so you can also go there and check it out. While people are typing their questions in, it would really help us if you could go to slido.com and use the event code OFR1, and it's just to answer a couple questions about what Joe talked about tonight. So if you could do that, that'd be awesome. There is another question, so let me see. Okay, so one of the questions is, what would be your steps for starting on-farm research on my acres when I have never completed it?
So if you're getting started for the first time, I know that the technology, a lot of people haven't gotten a chance to adopt a lot of that. So even if you're still using, you don't have variable rate technology, you don't have a yield monitor, for instance, you can still make these studies happen. They take a little bit more time. You have to have a weigh wagon, but it's so dependent, I think, on where you're at with your management. Do you suspect, based on what you've read, the on-farm research results that the Nebraska Extension puts out are online, going through and looking at those, looking at product literature, what's the first thing you want to test? And so if you're looking, for instance, at your soybean seeding rates and you're like, well, they keep telling me to plant 200,000 seeds per acre, that's probably an opportunity to go in and do something. If your nitrogen management, you're looking around and you just feel like you're just applying too much based on some of the numbers you're seeing, that might be a good place to start. I think the first step, is doing a little bit of research. And again, connect with somebody in Extension. I'm happy to start conversations like that. Any of the Extension educators would be glad to. Try and find out what's been done. You don't want to reinvent the wheel either. So take advantage of what's out there and then, start thinking about what am I willing to change maybe to improve my bottom line. So.
Awesome. I got another one for you. And this one is coming from our Facebook folks. But on the rate study with the graph, it possible that those areas of anomalies, the two blocks, actually had better economics and need to be treated differently in those areas of the field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that now we're starting to talk more site specific than just kind of the rate studies, and that you're exactly right. One of the things that we always try and go back and look at, especially if we have a lot of reps out in the field and we're not seeing a lot of mean separation in the data, that might be a clue to us that we need to go back and look at, is there some other variability that we have out in the field? And that's exactly right. We may find that because of soil type, elevation, things like that, one of these areas of the field has a different response in the yield and the marginal net return. And I think that's our clue when we can start looking at more of a site specific approach. So great question. We haven't seen that yet on our soybean studies. The field that I showed you is actually really homogeneous. There was hardly any variability at all. But yeah, great question. You're right on the money. The thing I like about doing those smaller blocks in the field is then you can start to separate out parts of the field and you get enough reps in each one and you can do that statistically as well. So you're on the right track.
Awesome. How many different variables can you incorporate into a study and still keep it manageable and also have usable data at the end of the year?
How big is your application equipment, I guess, is the thing. You can definitely, we've been able to definitely layer two different variables. So we've looked at seeding rate and nitrogen rates. Actually, when I showed the image of the as applied data with the white outlines around our treatment plots, that's actually what we were doing there. And we had the planter set up to do variable rate, and we had the nitrogen applicator. So each one of those blocks, we were changing that. So what you have to do is it's just a planning effort. Again, how big is the equipment? How many reps do I want in the end? Again, I'm always thinking at least 5. I like to get at least 5. If you have the variable rate technology, you can start to do those sub-field blocks. You can work in a lot more reps. So I think on that field, we had a lot. I think we ended up with, we had 4 seeding rates, 4 nitrogen rates, and I think in the end we had about 12 or 14 reps. And that was with some pretty large equipment. I think that was a 24-row planter and a 24-row nitrogen applicator on about 60, 70 acres. So it's definitely doable. You just got to make sure that you got everything set up and you don't overcomplicate it too much. But again, glad to sit down with you and visit more about that if you did. So looked like that was from Chad. Good to have you on here, Chad.
It was. A question is coming from our Facebook group. With the low rate blocks, like a 0-pound nitrogen rate, how do you deal with yield loss in those areas? And then how much area would need to be in that 0 rate?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. Nobody likes to do a 0 rate block. And you have to think about other things as well. We had the study that I showed you that prescription map upload there. We did talk the grower into doing. I think we had 12 reps, and we ended up talking them into doing 6 0 rate blocks. So, technically you need to have, for a balanced statistical analysis, you need to have 12. But I think, we were just looking to see, what was the natural potential there. And honestly, I think it still yielded about 180, 190 bushels per acre. So the 0 rate blocks, I think, are important. You don't have to, have a huge part of the field with those in there, I don't think. I mean, I guess I'll let the statisticians yell at me later. But we do learn some pretty important things for those if you can work a few of them in. Ultimately, our goal is to reduce nitrogen as much as we can. But, from a realistic standpoint, that corn, and we saw this in those plots, it was not as healthy as the corn. The stalks weren't as big. So if we'd had a windstorm go through, it probably would have blown that down. There's a lot of things to think about there. So, if you can put 1 or 2 in, I think it's useful. It really shows you the potential. But really, I think if you're not willing to do that, just dropping down 2 rates, for instance, maybe dropping down 60 pounds per acre, I think that tells you a lot as well. So, if you want to look at economic optimum rate, it's really good to have that 0 block in there. So I don't know, it's a balancing act, and you do lose some yield. So that's another reason I think why those smaller plots, instead of doing the field length strips, that's one advantage of that, is because you're talking, 0.2 of an acre or something like that. So.
Well, if you could fill the Slido out, we will hang around for a couple more minutes if there's any other questions. But Joe also had his contact information up. You can also access all of the supplemental resources as well as the recordings from the other sessions on the cropwatch.unl.edu streaming farm research. So check it out.